The humid, thick air of late June in Houston, Texas, clung to the evening like a shroud of deceptive, ordinary summer night that would soon be etched into the collective memory of the city as the prelude to unspeakable sorrow. It was a night of June 16th, 2024, Father's Day, a date typically reserved for family gatherings, quiet reflection, and the celebration of paternal bonds. Instead, for the Nungaray family, it became the genesis of an enduring nightmare, a terrifying void that swallowed their youngest daughter, Jocelyn. She was only 12 years old, on the cusp of teenage life, a time of blossoming curiosity and burgeoning independence. That independence, sadly, was what put her in harm's way, illustrating the razor-thin margin between childhood innocence and adult danger. The timeline begins with a moment that, in retrospect, screams of foreboding but felt utterly normal at the time. Jocelyn, having been grounded and told to stay in, managed to sneak out her family's apartment in the sprawling, working-class southeast side of Houston. The reasons for her departure remain a private, poignant detail known only to her family, and perhaps the cold concrete paths she walked, but the effect was immediate and catastrophic. Around 10:00 p.m., under the deceptive cloak of night, she ventured into the labyrinthine residential streets near her home. A child of her generation, her movements were documented not just by the pervasive network of municipal surveillance and doorbell cameras that now blanket modern life, but by her own digital shadow. Authorities later confirmed she made a phone call to her boyfriend shortly after leaving home, a mundane act of teenage communication that tragically marked one of the last known times her voice was heard. The intervening hours from her departure until the early morning remain a terrifying stretch of time, a dark canvas upon which depravity was painted. CCTV footage, painstakingly recovered and analyzed by Houston Police Department HPD homicide detectives, offered chilling, fragmented glimpses of her final journey. The cameras confirmed that Jocelyn had walked approximately half a mile from her apartment complex. Around 12:45 a.m., the surveillance footage captured the moment that shattered a family and incited global revulsion. The video showed Jocelyn at the corner of West Fuqua and Royal Palms, near a convenience store that served as an anchor in the neighborhood's nocturnal landscape. It was here, in this dimly lit intersection where everyday commerce met the shadows of the night, that she was seen interacting with two adult males. The footage, later described by police as critical evidence, revealed an interaction that appeared, at first glance, disturbingly casual. Jocelyn, small for her age and vulnerable in the vastness of the night, was seen talking to the two individuals, later identified as Franklin Jose Pena Ramos and Johan Jose Martinez Rangel. The sight of a 12-year-old girl engaging with two grown men late at night is, inherently, a wrenching detail, a snapshot of misplaced trust, or perhaps a desperate attempt to navigate a situation she was rapidly losing control of. It is impossible to watch such a scene without the heavy, aching burden of what comes next. Did she feel fear? Was she coerced? Did she, in the innocence of her youth, mistake them for harmless strangers? These questions hang in the air, weighted by the certainty of her fate. The interaction was brief before the fatal walk began. The three were seen walking together toward a convenience store, a momentary pause in the relentless march of events. The suspect reportedly made a purchase, and then, inexorably, the trio proceeded down a path leading toward the bayou, one of Houston's many watery tributaries that, by day, offers pockets of nature and, by night, provides deep, accessible cover. The journey took them beneath a bridge near Scarsdale Boulevard, a dark, secluded, and utterly defenseless location. This underpass, intended to support the ceaseless flow of traffic overhead, became the silent witness to a barbaric crime. As the morning of Monday, June 17th, dawned, the world began to stir, utterly unaware of the horror that had transpired beneath the concrete. Jocelyn's family, realizing she was gone, initiated a desperate search. The panic of a mother realizing her child is missing, amplified by the helplessness of knowing the night had passed, is a visceral kind of pain that cannot be fully captured in words. They contacted the police, and the search officially began, but the timeline was already set. At approximately 6:15 a.m., a gut-wrenching discovery was made by a concerned citizen walking near the bridge. Beneath the overpass, in the murky, desolate expanse near the bayou, the body of Jocelyn Nungaray was found. The details surrounding the discovery were immediately suggestive of foul play. Her body was partially submerged in the shallow water, and immediate observations led investigators to confirm that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The callous brutality of the act instantly transformed a missing persons case into a high-profile homicide investigation. The image of a young life, full of potential and bright future, extinguished by such brutal, senseless violence in the cold light of a Houston morning, sent shockwaves through the local community. The sheer injustice of a 12-year-old girl, an entire future stolen, discarded in the bayou like refuse, ignited a powerful, aching empathy for the Nungaray family. The initial scene was one of overwhelming sorrow, marked by the flashing lights of patrol cars, the grim faces of forensic technicians, and the crushing weight of reality for the family members who arrived. The sight of a teddy bear or flowers placed hastily near the scene would soon become a familiar, mournful tribute, symbolizing the innocence that was so violently lost. HBD homicide detectives took control, establishing a massive perimeter and initiating the meticulous, agonizing process of evidence collection. They understood immediately that this was not just a local crime. It was an act so profoundly disturbing that it demanded every resource. The timeline of those initial hours focused solely on preservation, securing the crime scene, collecting biological and trace evidence, and most crucially, retrieving every available piece of video footage. The investigators knew that in modern urban murder cases, the suspect's faces and movements would likely be captured somewhere, offering the first and most critical thread to pull on. It was a race against time, a desperate effort to match the fleeting, terrifying images captured on video with real, identifiable suspects. The city, meanwhile, awoke to the grim news, and a collective sense of vulnerability settled over Houston, an invisible, crushing weight of knowing that pure evil had walked their streets the night before. The news of Jocelyn Nungaray's brutal murder did not merely surface. It detonated, ripping through complacency of summer and leaving a crater of shock, fury, and agonizing fear across Houston. This was not just a crime statistic. It was a violation of a child, the cruelest kind of human tragedy, and the community demanded immediate, uncompromising justice. Section 2 of this timeline focuses on the relentless, meticulous detective work that followed the discovery of tense, high-stakes investigation powered by technology, traditional police methods, and the desperate urgency of a city holding its breath. The search was over, replaced by a hunt, and every second counted. The first and most critical task for the Houston Police Department was establishing the full timeline of Jocelyn's final movements and, crucially, identifying the two men seen with her. The HBD Homicide Division, in coordination with their Fusion Center partners, launched an immediate dragnet for digital evidence. Detectives began a laborious process of canvassing every business, home, and intersection within a several-block radius of the crime scene and the initial sighting. Every flickering image, every frame of grainy video from doorbell cameras, security systems, and traffic cameras became a potential breadcrumb leading to the killer's doorstep. This digital investigation revealed the relentless, agonizing progression of the group from a convenience store to the remote Underpass. The evidence was damning and spoke a cold, hard language of betrayal and predation. The surveillance footage confirmed that after the trio left the convenience store, they walked toward the isolated area beneath the bridge. This detail was especially crucial. It showed the suspects actively leading the vulnerable girl away from areas of potential visibility and safety into the shadows. Investigators deduced immediately that the location was chosen for its secrecy, a clear indicator of premeditation in the execution of the crime, if not the planning of the initial encounter. The fact that the men appeared relatively calm and casual on camera in the moments leading up to the attack only amplified the chilling nature of their intent, suggesting a horrifying normalcy to their predatory behavior. Physical evidence gathered from the crime scene near the bayou was equally vital. Forensic teams, working under the oppressive Texas sun, collected key biological samples, clothing, and trace evidence. The sexual assault and subsequent strangulation of the young victim were immediately confirmed by the medical examiner's office, confirming the savagery of the attack. These biological samples were rushed to the crime lab for DNA analysis, the modern equivalent of a smoking gun. In high-profile cases like this, Law enforcement relies heavily on the speed and accuracy of DNA testing, hoping for a match in state or national databases, but also knowing that without a prior record, the DNA serves as a critical marker for confirming the suspect's involvement once they are identified. The intense public pressure fueled the investigation speed. News coverage was immediate and pervasive, featuring heartbroken interviews with Jocelyn's family, her mother's tears, her grandmother's anguished pleas, all broadcast against a backdrop of a growing memorial of candles, teddy bears, and handwritten notes. This widespread media attention served a dual purpose. It mourned the lost child and simultaneously functioned as a mass call for tips. The HBD released still images from the surveillance footage showing the two suspects, their faces initially obscured but their distinct appearances providing a focus for the public's eye. The release of these images transformed every Houstonian into an amateur detective, scouring their memories and security footage for a match. Within 48 hours, the relentless combination of digital forensics and public tips began to narrow the gap. Detectives received multiple actionable leads, focusing particularly on two men who matched the distinct clothing and physical builds of the individuals in the surveillance footage. The men were identified by sources as frequenting the immediate neighborhood. This information allowed investigators to pivot from general searching to targeted tracking. They began to utilize mobile location data, another critical tool in the modern investigative arsenal, to track the movements of phones associated with the potential suspects in the hours surrounding the murder. This digital trail confirmed that the suspects were in the immediate vicinity of the crime scene during the critical window between 12:45 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. The mounting evidence surveillance, footage, geographical location data, and eyewitness tips converged on the two individuals, Franklin Jose Pena Ramos and Johan Jose Martinez Rangel. The swiftness of this identification, given the complexity of the urban environment, was a testament to the concentrated focus of the HBD. The emotional toll on the detectives, wading through the darkest evidence of human depravity, must have been immense, yet they worked with singular purpose to bring a measure of accountability to the Nungaray family. The gravity of the situation was compounded by the early, swirling rumors about the suspects' identities and backgrounds, a detail that would later ignite a ferocious national debate. But for the detectives in the trenches, their only focus was the cold, unyielding facts of the homicide. They had faces, names, and a digital footprint. The next and most perilous step was the apprehension. The city held its breath, praying that the men who had stolen Jocelyn's future would not be allowed to slip away. The agony of the search for Jocelyn had been replaced by the focused, burning hunt for her killers, driven by the memory of a 12-year-old girl's smile and profound outrage over her needless, brutal demise. The framework of justice was being prepared, but the closure, the true healing, would take an unbearable amount of time. With the identities of the suspects confirmed, the intense investigation shifted into the high-stakes phase of apprehension. Section 3 details the swift and chilling capture of Franklin Jose Pena Ramos and Johan Jose Martinez Rangel, a moment that provided the Nungaray family with the first, fragile foothold in their long march toward justice, but simultaneously unveiled a disturbing layer of the suspect background that amplified public fury. The cold, calculated nature of their arrest, a stark contrast to the barbaric heat of their crimes, served as a sobering conclusion to the agonizing hunt. The targeted tracking efforts culminated quickly. Detectives established surveillance on locations believed to be frequented by Pena Ramos and Martinez Rangel. The two men, seemingly unaware of the extent of the evidence against them or the ferocity of the manhunt, were reportedly attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy, a chilling display of detachment following an act of unspeakable cruelty. The police operation was executed with precision, ensuring the safety of the public and the arresting officers. On Wednesday, June 19th, just 72 hours after Jocelyn's body was found, both Pena Ramos and Martinez Rangel were successfully apprehended. Martinez Rangel, the younger of the two, was arrested first. The details of his capture were not sensationalized. He was simply taken into custody, the mundane reality of handcuffs and police cars abruptly ending his brief freedom. Pena Ramos was arrested shortly thereafter. The swiftness of the arrest underscored the efficacy of the investigative work and provided a temporary, collective sigh of relief for a city gripped by fear. These two individuals, captured so quickly after their monstrous act, were now tangible figures onto whom the public could project their grief, their rage, and their desperate need for accountability. The immediate proceedings following the arrest delivered the first official, public accounting of the suspects' alleged actions. Both men were formally charged with capital murder, a charge that in Texas carries a potential penalty of life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty. During their initial magistration, the details of the evidence were laid bare, the surveillance video placing them with Jocelyn, leading her to the secluded area, the forensic evidence linking them to the sexual assault and strangulation, and the confirmation that their actions were calculated and brutal. These stark legal documents became the cold, hard proof of the violation of a child's life, transforming abstract grief into concrete legal action. It was during these initial legal proceedings that the suspect's background, a detail previously hinted at by rumors, was officially confirmed, sending a secondary shockwave through the nation. Both Franklin Jose Pena Ramos, 26, and Johan Jose Martinez Rangel, 22, were revealed to be undocumented immigrants from Venezuela. Moreover, both had reportedly entered the United States illegally through the southern border near El Paso, Texas, and had been released by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, into the country. This disclosure instantly and tragically broadened the scope of the local tragedy, injecting it violently into the center of a volatile national debate on border security and immigration policy. The revelation ignited a firestorm of public outrage that far exceeded the typical community reaction to a capital murder case. The sorrow for Jocelyn, already immense, was compounded by a searing, specific form of anger, the feeling that this crime was preventable, that bureaucratic failures or systemic oversights had placed these specific individuals in a position to encounter the young girl. For many, the suspect's immigration status was not merely a footnote, but a painful, infuriating detail that transformed the case from a tragedy into a symbol of perceived national failure. The empathy for Jocelyn's family was magnified by a raw, politicized resentment toward those who were seen as failing to protect the nation's most vulnerable. The suspects, held on multi-million-dollar bonds, $10 million for Pena Ramos and $9 million for Martinez, Rangel, were isolated from the general population in the county jail. The high bond amounts reflected the extreme gravity of the charges and the flight risk posed by their status. The legal process, however, moved slowly, providing a frustrating counterpoint to the speed of the capture and the intensity of public demand for swift justice. For the Nungaray family, the capture was not closure, but merely the end of the first chapter. Their daughter was gone, and now they faced the agonizing, protracted battle of navigating the justice system, a process that promises fairness but can never truly restore what was lost. The narrative of this section is one of profound, accelerating contrast. The cool professionalism of the police ensuring the capture of evil, immediately followed by the emotional volatility of a public struggling to reconcile the senseless violence with the disturbing facts of the perpetrator's origins. The faces of Pena Ramos and Martinez Rangel, once grainy images on a security camera, were now front-page news, their alleged actions transforming Jocelyn Nungaray from a simple, beloved child into a symbol of devastating, preventable loss. The final section of this timeline moves beyond the crime and the capture, focusing instead on the seismic, far-reaching impact of Jocelyn Nungaray's death, a wave of communal grief that morphed into a national, highly polarized socio-political firestorm. The profound sorrow felt by the Nungaray family and the Houston community became the catalyst for a furious, complex public debate, where empathy for the victim clashed head-on with contentious realities of immigration and border security. In the immediate aftermath of the arrests, the outpouring of grief for Jocelyn was immense and deeply personal. The makeshift memorial at the Bayou Underpass swelled daily, transforming the site of ultimate darkness into a beacon of mournful light. Candles burned continuously, teddy bears stacked high, and handwritten notes fluttered in the humid breeze, each one a testament to a life lost too soon and a community's broken heart. Neighbors, strangers, and friends gathered for vigils, the silence broken only by the sobs of the heartbroken and the quiet, persistent murmuring of prayers. These gatherings were crucial, They offered a necessary communal space to process the shock, the anger, and the crushing vulnerability exposed by the murder of a 12-year-old girl who had merely snuck out on a summer night. This collective grieving established Jocelyn not just as a victim, but as a symbol of every child's fragility. However, the raw, shared sorrow quickly encountered the brutal reality of the suspect's legal status, escalating the case from a local tragedy to a national flashpoint. The confirmation that Franklin Jose Pena Ramos and Johan Jose Martinez Rangel were both undocumented Venezuelan migrants who had recently crossed a border and been released reportedly on certain conditions fueled a furious political backlash. Critics of the current immigration policies seized upon the case as a devastating example of governmental failure and lax border enforcement, arguing that the crime was entirely preventable had the established systems functioned differently or more strictly. The response from political leaders was swift and intense. Local and state officials expressed profound outrage, demanding accountability from federal immigration agencies. High-ranking state politicians utilized the tragedy to reinforce calls for increased border security, emphasizing the inherent dangers posed by individuals entering the country without proper vetting. The case became a central talking point in the ongoing national debate, turning the names Jocelyn Nungaray, Pena Ramos, and Martinez Rangel into shorthand for the complex, often tragic intersection of border politics and public safety. For the Nungaray family, this politicization added an unimaginable burden to their private grief. They were forced to mourn their daughter in the public eye while her death was simultaneously co-opted for ideological battles. While the family sought only justice for Jocelyn, their personal devastation became a powerful narrative tool wielded by politicians across the spectrum. This dynamic forced the community and the nation to grapple with uncomfortable, painful questions. How do we balance humanitarian concerns with public safety? And what is the true cost, measured not in dollars but in lives, of a porous or strained border system? The public discussion was often harsh, lacking nuance, and driven by raw emotion, a cycle of phobia, blame, and anger that risked overshadowing the beautiful memory of the young girl at the center of it all. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings began their slow, deliberate path. Both suspects were formally indicted for capital murder, ensuring that the full force of the state's judicial system would be brought to bear. The prosecution, acutely aware of the national attention and severity of the crime, began preparing what would undoubtedly be a complex, high-profile case. The defense, facing overwhelming evidence, began the difficult task of mounting a legal challenge. For the Nungaray family, the courtroom became the next battleground, a place where they would be forced to relive the horror through the lens of legal testimony and forensic detail, a grueling process for any grieving family. The story of the killing of Jocelyn Nungaray is, ultimately, a timeline of cascading despair, the heartbreaking timeline of a child's final walk, the cold chronology of a detective's successful hunt, the sudden jolt of the arrest, and the prolonged, painful aftermath of community trying to heal while a nation argues over the very system that failed to protect her. The legacy of this case is not just a memory of the beautiful 12-year-old girl with a bright future, but the enduring, wrenching understanding that her death exposed a gaping wound in the national fabric, a wound that continues to ache long after the initial headlines fade.